In this video, I'm going to name the greatest quarterback season in every NFL franchise's history. As opposed to some of my previous videos, I put a little bit more emphasis on team success. So basically, these are what I think are the best seasons in terms of a combination of stats and accomplishment that every team has ever had. So if you're looking for criteria, there you go. Are you happy? Did I make you happy? I couldn't make my wife happy, but did I make you happy? Let's get this show going before I start crying again. Before I start, I want to give a shout out to today's video sponsor, DraftKings. Do you want to get in on the fantasy action, but you're sick of roster management? This year, best ball on DraftKings is bigger than ever. Just draft your team once in a snake draft at the beginning of the season. Unlike what you would typically find in a daily fantasy sport contest, there are no crossover between teams in best ball. Each week, you'll automatically rack up points from top scorers on your team. No roster management to worry about. To start playing best ball, download the DraftKings app, sign up using code BARRYM, enter DraftKings Best Ball $10 million contest, and draft your team for the season. Each week, you'll automatically rack up points from all your top scorers. No ads, drops, trades, or I should have played him instead. You'll be able to enjoy the fantasy football action without the need to manage your team. The team with the most points at the end of the season will take home the $1 million top prize. So what are you waiting for? Head to the DraftKings app and sign up with code BARRYM and start playing best ball today. Only on DraftKings with code BARRYM. Once again, thank you to DraftKings for sponsoring this video. Arizona Cardinals 2008 Kurt Warner. 2008 Kurt Warner's regular season wasn't as good as 2015 Carson Palmer's regular season, but Warner gets my vote because Warner was an absolute boss in the postseason that year, whereas Palmer flamed out. Warner led Arizona to their only Super Bowl appearance to date, and in that playoff run threw 11 touchdown passes to 3 interceptions with a stellar passer rating and other advanced metrics. The one bugaboo is that he did throw a pick 6 in the Super Bowl, but he also did make up for it at the very end by throwing a go-ahead touchdown pass late in the fourth quarter that his defense could not hang on to. Shout out Santonio Holmes for ruining Arizona fans' dreams everywhere. Atlanta Falcons 2016 Matt Ryan. I've already done a lot of videos talking about this season by Matt Ryan. He was unbelievable in terms of his consistency and efficiency. In 19 total games, including the postseason, he never had a objectively bad game. That's not to say he played great in every single game, but just looking at these numbers, he always came to play this particular season. But again, there is no video that can talk about Matt Ryan's 2016 season without mentioning how it ended. I really do think had the Falcons not had the most historic collapse in the history of football and Matt Ryan had made just 1 or 2 more plays, his 2016 season might have been the greatest season that any quarterback has ever had. Baltimore Ravens 2012 Joe Flacco. Flacco's 2012 regular season doesn't come close to Lamar Jackson's MVP 2019 regular season, but Lamar Jackson flamed out and went one and done in the playoffs, whereas, as we all know, Joe Flacco had a legendary 2012 playoff run. Shout out to Raheem Moore. In the playoff run, Flacco led the Ravens to their second Super Bowl championship ever, throwing for 11 touchdowns with no picks and a 117.2 passer rating. He also won Super Bowl MVP for his efforts. Like a true American hero, Flacco then got paid a shitload of money and stopped giving any effort. Buffalo Bills 1990 Jim Kelly. I know that newer Bills fans are probably pissing and shitting their pants that a Josh Allen season isn't on here, but I went with Kelly because the Bills were honestly the best team in football in 1990, even if they didn't bring home the Lombardi. Kelly led the league with a 101.2 passer rating and had a stellar regular season, and he kept up his stellar performance in the playoffs. Although his Super Bowl was a little bit uneven, he put the Bills in perfect position to capture the Lombardi. Unfortunately, his kicker was Scott Norwood instead of Adam Vinatieri, and the Bills lost by 1 point in what would be the first of 4 straight Super Bowl losses and by far their greatest chance at taking home a Super Bowl. Carolina Panthers 2015 Cam Newton. For a split second, I thought about putting 2003 Jake Delhomme because he had an amazing postseason and was incredible in the Super Bowl as well. Much better than Cam's Super Bowl performance in 2015. And before you say Cam played against a legendary defense, which he did, the 03 Patriots were also the best defense in the league that year, and Delhomme lit him up. But the season is more than just one game. And Cam Newton, as we all know, in 2015, threw 35 touchdowns, ran for 10 more, and had an absolutely incredible conference championship game versus Arizona, winning by 34 points before falling short at the very end. Chicago Bears 1943 Sid Luckman. That's right, you know your quarterback history is complete horseshit when you have to go back to a time when Hitler was still alive to find a season. 1943 Sid Luckman was unbelievable. His numbers even back then would translate well to this era now, putting up a 107.5 passer rating, averaging almost 11 yards per attempt and 28 touchdown passes to 12 interceptions. He then capped it off in the championship game by throwing 5 touchdowns touchdowns and rushing for 64 yards in a 20-point win over Washington. Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to see a Chicago Bears quarterback season this good ever again. Sorry, Justin Fields fans. Cincinnati Bengals, 1981 Ken Anderson. I could have gone with 2005 Carson Palmer or 2021 Joe Burrow, but I went with 1981 Ken Anderson because he won MVP for his stellar regular season, and he was also better in the playoffs than Burrow was in 2021, although both of their seasons would end the same in losses in Super Bowl. Anderson, however, had 3 total touchdowns in the Super Bowl, although he did have 2 interceptions, and there are a lot of plays in that Super Bowl that if you go back and watch, where the Bengals came excruciatingly close to getting over the finish line, but it's been forgotten about as history has gone on, and the 49ers went on to become a dynasty in the 80s. If Ken Anderson had won Super Bowl 16, there's no doubt he's in the Hall of Fame right now. Cleveland Browns, 1947 Otto Graham. This one does kind of come with a bit of an asterisk because Graham was essentially playing against plumbers. And I'm not just saying that because it took place in 1947, I'm saying it because the Browns at this point in time were playing in the AAFC, the All-American Football Conference, not the NFL. However, the NFL later decided to accept the AAFC stats and incorporate them into a player's career NFL stats, which is what they did with Graham, but I digress. Graham's numbers were excellent, a 109.2 passer rating, 25 touchdown passes, another touchdown run, and he also led them to a championship. Even though his final numbers were mediocre in the game, he did run for a score. Can you believe that, though? The Cleveland Browns at one point were winning championships consistently. God, thank God it's not the 1940s anymore. Dallas Cowboys, 1971 Roger Staubach. This was actually one of the toughest ones because the Cowboys are interesting. When they've won their Super Bowls, their quarterback stats really weren't that imposing or overwhelming, but guys like Tony Romo and Dak Prescott have come in and put up great individual regular season numbers and failed to even make a conference championship game. I almost went with Troy Aikman in 1992, but in the end, I went with 71 Staubach because he went 13-0 in his starts, including the postseason, and ended up winning Super Bowl MVP when he threw for 2 touchdowns against the Dolphins. He also had a passer rating of 104.8 in the regular season, which for the early 70s is, I don't know, like somebody putting up a 120 passer rating nowadays. Also, Staubach is a troop, so if you disagree with my selection here, you're saying that you hate the troops. Just something to think about. Denver Broncos, 2013 Peyton Manning. Similar to Dallas, when Denver has won their Super Bowls, it really hasn't been because their quarterback had amazing numbers. 2015 Peyton was one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, and the late 90s Broncos that won back-to-back Super Bowls won those Super Bowls with John Elway putting up good but not great numbers. And in the end, even though 2013 Peyton would end up losing the Super Bowl, his raw stats were too good to pass up. As I've already talked about by now, his raw stats were unbelievable, setting records for most passing yards and passing touchdowns in a single season. Through 18 games, it looked like Peyton might have had a chance at the greatest season ever, but then Denver got blown out so badly in the Super Bowl that nobody ever really talks about that team anymore. Which again is kind of crazy because they broke the all-time single-season scoring record and had a bunch of huge performances, but as they say, nobody remembers second place, unless it's 2007 Patriots, or LeBron James losing in the finals. Detroit Lions, 2011 Matthew Stafford. 2011 was the year of the quarterback, as the NFL lockout really stymied defenses and helped quarterbacks get a quick start, and Stafford was no exception as he threw for over 5,000 yards and 41 touchdowns, leading the Lions to a 10-6 record and a playoff spot. As always with Stafford, he did have some bugaboos in terms of interceptions, and his playoff appearance would be short-lived as the Lions traveled to New Orleans in the wild card round, where Stafford played well, but the defense did not come to play, as New Orleans dropped 45 points in a 45-28 win over Stafford. It says a lot about the Lions' quarterback history, or lack thereof, that this is the answer, but it is. Green Bay Packers, 2011 Aaron Rodgers. This was the toughest choice I had to make, because not only did you have Rodgers, not only did you have Favre, you also had Bart Starr. What's the best combination of stats and team success? And maybe 2011 Rodgers isn't the right choice because Rodgers went one and done in the playoffs, whereas Bart Starr in 66 won MVP and Super Bowl MVP, and Brett Favre in 96 won MVP and the Super Bowl. But I'm sorry, I know what I saw. In 2011, Aaron Rodgers just did so much superhuman stuff while putting up otherworldly numbers. 45 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, a 122.5 passer rating in just 15 games, while leading a terrible defense to a 15-1 record with some help from Matt Flynn. It's just unfortunate that his playoff performance against the Giants featured a comedy of errors from his teammates and left the 2011 Packers much forgotten about, a lot like the 2013 Broncos. Houston Texans, 2019 Deshaun Watson. Statistically, Deshaun Watson's best season with Houston was in 2020, but the team went just 4-12, so I couldn't put that on here in good good conscience. Matt Schaub had a couple solid seasons back in the day, but really didn't have any sort of playoff success. So I think the best individual season that the Texans have ever had, combined with some playoff success, was in 2019, when Watson threw for 26 scores, ran for 7 more, and led the team to a 10-6 record, while also winning a playoff game before they famously took a 24-0 lead against Kansas City in the divisional round before getting outscored 51-7 the remainder of the game. I'm sure Watson wishes that he was still most remembered for getting outscored 51-7 at one point in a playoff game, but things change pretty quickly in life. Indianapolis Colts, 2004 Peyton Manning. Another franchise that's had a lot of successful quarterback history. This was similar to Green Bay, where Manning didn't even make a conference championship game, but his numbers in the regular season were so historically dominant, I had to go with it anyway. 49 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 121.1 passer rating, set the all-time single-season record for adjusted net yards per attempt. He also had an amazing playoff game in the wild card round versus Denver before the season ended against the Patriots in Foxborough. Johnny Unitas in 1959 had a stellar season ending in a championship, but I just couldn't go with it over Peyton's incredible numbers. Jacksonville Jaguars, 2007 David Garrard. I know that Jags fans are hoping someday soon Trevor Lawrence will take the mantle here, but for now I went with Garrard. In 2007 he missed 4 games, but he still finished with 18 touchdowns to 3 interceptions and a passer rating of 102.2. He also led a great comeback versus Pittsburgh in the playoffs, which set up a divisional round matchup with the undefeated New England Patriots. Garrard and the Jaguars gave it their all and put up a respectable effort, but they fell short 31-20. Whatever happened to Garrard anyway? He was always a solid quarterback, and then one day, poof, just disappeared. Kansas City Chiefs, 2018 Patrick Mahomes. I know this might be a little bit of a shocking choice. Not that I chose Patrick Mahomes, but the season that I chose for Patrick Mahomes. Most people would say, well, you have to choose 2022 because he won MVP, he won a Super Bowl and Super Bowl MVP, but 2018 Mahomes is the best version of Mahomes, and I don't think there would be any doubt about it if not for D Ford's dumbass lining up off sides. 2018 Mahomes threw for over 5,000 yards, 50 touchdowns, a 113.8 passer rating, and led one of the worst defenses in the league to a 12-4 record and the first seed, which set up the aforementioned AFC Championship game at home against the Patriots, where Mahomes threw for nearly 300 yards and 3 scores, but lost to Brady after D Ford lined up offside. Perhaps the most impressive stat about the 2018 Chiefs is that in 18 games, their offense never scored under 26 points once. They were an absolutely incredible team offensively, and in my opinion, I'd say they're the greatest offense in the history of the league, even if they didn't make a Super Bowl. Las Vegas Raiders, 1976 Ken Stabler. Famous premarital sex haver Ken Stabler could also play on the field. In 1976, he had 27 touchdowns with a 103.4 passer rating, and he went 11-1 in his 12 starts. The Raiders finished 13-1 and finally broke through over Pittsburgh to make it to the Super Bowl for the first time in the 70s. Stabler continued his great success in the postseason, narrowly defeating the Patriots on some controversial late calls, before his efficient outings versus Pittsburgh and Minnesota in the last 2 games to capture the Raiders' first ever Super Bowl championship. Looking back now, I'm surprised that he wasn't selected Super Bowl MVP. Los Angeles Chargers, 1981 Dan Fouts. Phillip Rivers and Dan Fouts had much of the same career, although Fouts was a little bit different off the field than Rivers was in terms of his sex life. Both put up humongous stats but lack team accomplishments, but to me, Fouts' most memorable season, which gets the nod over 2004 Drew Brees, to be honest, came in 1981 when he threw for nearly 5,000 yards, 33 touchdowns with an amazing passer rating and not a lot of sacks, carrying a terrible defensive team to the playoffs where he won the famous playoff game versus the Miami Dolphins, in which everybody was passing out and had to be carried off the field. Unfortunately, Fouts' season would end in Cincinnati in the AFC Championship game in historically terrible weather, and the Chargers lost by 20. But hey, when you're talking about combination of stats, era adjusted, and team success, this is really the best I could do for the Chargers. Here's looking at you, Justin Herbert. Los Angeles Rams, 1999 Kurt Warner. A pretty easy choice, although 2021 Matt Stafford also deserves a shout out. Warner came out of nowhere to put up over 4,000 yards, 41 touchdowns, and a 109.2 passer rating before leading the Rams in the postseason to his first and only career Super Bowl win. He would throw 5 touchdowns in their opening playoff game versus the Vikings before barely squeaking by a dominant defensive Tampa team in an 11-6 weird game in the NFC Championship game. Finally, he would defeat the Jeff Fisher-led Titans, throwing for over 400 yards and 2 scores, including the game-winning touchdown pass with a couple minutes left to win Super Bowl MVP, while also legitimizing symbolizing the greatest show on turf. Miami Dolphins, 1984 Dan Marino. Not a very hard selection and one you probably expected, but I'll just go through it again. Marino, over 5,000 yards, 48 touchdowns, 108.9 passer rating. He led the Flippers to the Super Bowl with a dominant performance versus Pittsburgh in the AFC Championship game before getting the shit kicked out of him by the 49ers in the Super Bowl, which would end up being his only Super Bowl appearance in his legendary career. But still, 84 Marino is probably the greatest individual season any quarterback's ever had, not just in Miami Dolphins history, but NFL history. And honestly, there might be no debate about it had he been able to seal the deal in the Super Bowl. Minnesota Vikings, 1998 Randall Cunningham. The 98 Vikings are one of the most famous teams to not only not win the Super Bowl, but to not even make the Super Bowl, largely because they had a rookie named Randy Moss, and their offense at the time was the most explosive offense in the history of the league. Randall Cunningham was a big part of that, as he threw for 34 touchdowns and over 3,700 yards, while also running for another. Their dominance continued in the divisional round versus Arizona, as they won by 20, where Cunningham threw for 3 scores. And then you know how the story ends by now. They hosted the Atlanta Falcons in the conference championship game, and were up 7 late in the game when Gary Anderson, who hadn't missed a kick all year, whiffed on a field goal. Atlanta then went down to tie the game at 27 for winning 30-27 in overtime, giving the Vikings a bittersweet ending. But still, this has the best combination of individual achievements and team success of any Vikings season ever, in my opinion, as Cunningham was first-team All-Pro and probably should have been named MVP. New England Patriots, 2007 Tom Brady. It's ironic that Tom Brady won 6 rings with the Patriots, and it's a season where he didn't win a ring that gets the nod. With the addition of Randy Moss, remember him, the Patriots broke the 98 Vikings single-season scoring record in 2007, but unlike the 98 Vikings, who were unable to go perfect in the regular season, the 07 Patriots did them even better, going 16-0. They also won the conference championship game despite 3 interceptions from Brady, but let's back up a bit. Brady threw for over 4,800 yards, 50 touchdowns, breaking the single-season record, and ran for 2 more, and basically being the best quarterback in the league in virtually every single stat. You guys also know how this season ended by now. The Patriots were 1 defensive stop away from going 19-0 and being immortal, but thankfully David Tyree had gum on his helmet to prevent Brady from winning even more. It also would have sucked if Brady won by scoring just 14 points. The guy already has 2 Super Bowl wins where he scored just 13 points. I didn't really have to want to hear about how amazing he was because his historic offense could only put up 14 points in a fucking Super Bowl. So thank you to the Giants for making sure he did not get credit for that. New Orleans Saints, 2009 Drew Brees. Pretty easy one here. It's the only Super Bowl season the Saints have ever had, and Drew Brees was incredible that year. The Saints started the season 13-0 before losing a couple late regular season games, before turning it on again in the postseason, blowing out Arizona, scraping by Minnesota thanks to some timely turnovers by Brett Favre and also Bountygate, before defeating the Colts in the Super Bowl with help from Peyton Manning throwing a 74-yard touchdown pass to Tracy Porter in the 4th quarter. Brees probably should have won MVP this year instead of Manning, as he had 4,400 yards, 34 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions with a 109.6 passer rating in just 15 games. But I'm sure Brees will take the 8 touchdowns, no picks, and 117 passer rating in the postseason, as well as a Super Bowl MVP that eluded Peyton in 2009 instead. New York Giants, 2011 Eli Manning. Again, not really much of a choice here. 2011 was Eli Manning's clear-cut best season, as he threw for nearly 5,000 yards with 29 touchdown passes and a solid 92.9 passer rating with great yards per attempt and adjusted net yards per attempt numbers. But again, with Eli, it was about the postseason, as he finished 4-0 with over 1,200 yards passing, 9 touchdown passes and an interception, and once again winning over Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, a game in which he completed 75% of his throws for nearly 300 yards, a touchdown, and a 103.7 passer rating, as the Giants won 21-17. He also couldn't have done it without Kyle Williams. New York Jets, 1968 Joe Namath. Namath's numbers don't look sexy, just over 3,100 yards, 15 touchdowns, 17 picks, 72 passer rating, but for his era, they were very good. And although he is most famous for his guaranteed Super Bowl MVP versus the heavily favored Colts in the Super Bowl, in order to get to the Super Bowl, he threw for 3 touchdowns versus the Raiders in the AFC Championship game. For most franchises, this might not be enough to get on the list, but it's the Jets, so yeah. Philadelphia Eagles, 2004 Donovan McNabb. It came down to 04 McNabb, Jalen Hurts last year in 2022, and 2013 Nick Foles when he threw 27 touchdowns and 2 picks, didn't win a playoff game. Unfortunately, or fortunately in my case, the only time the Eagles did win the Super Bowl ever was with a backup quarterback, so there's been no seasons where an Eagles quarterback had both a great regular season and a Super Bowl win, although it should have happened last year if not not for Carl Sheffers and the Sodfather. But McNabb in 04 gets my vote because he was absolutely incredible. The addition of Terrell Owens took his game to another level. In essentially just 14 games, he went 13-1, threw for almost 4,000 yards, 31 touchdowns, 8 picks, a 105 passer rating, while also running for 3 more scores and piloting the Eagles to easy, efficient wins over the Vikings and Falcons in the playoffs to get to their first Super Bowl since 1980. Unfortunately for McNabb, his season will be most remembered for whether or not he puked in the Super Bowl, as some people claim, although it's never been confirmed or denied. McNabb threw 3 touchdowns, but also 3 interceptions and had some boneheaded plays in a winnable game where they lost by 3 to the New England Patriots and a guy named Tom Brady. That's interesting. Both Brady and Mahomes faced the Eagles in their 3rd Super Bowls. Pittsburgh Steelers, 1978 Terry Bradshaw. Sure, Ben Roethlisberger has a lot more great raw stat seasons than Bradshaw did, but 1978 Bradshaw won league MVP and Super Bowl MVP, throwing for 28 touchdowns in the regular season before having an incredibly efficient postseason in which he had 8 touchdowns and a 104.1 passer rating, including the Super Bowl versus Dallas when he threw for 4 touchdowns in a 35-31 win. Bradshaw's clutch play in the 4th quarter of the Super Bowl also brought the trophy home for Pittsburgh, their 3rd Lombardi in a 5-year span, and they would repeat the next year to have 4 in 6 years. San Francisco 49ers, 1989 Joe Montana. This came down to either 1989 Montana or 1994 Steve Young, but I went with Montana because I think his postseason was better because it's the best postseason run any quarterback's ever had. I've gone through this before, but I mean, just look at the numbers, look at the results. They completely beat the shit out of every team they faced. I will say, though, that Montana's season in 89, he did have a lot more close calls than I remember for the 49ers, who are often talked about as the best team ever, along with the 85 Bears. There were a lot of games that year Montana kind of saved them in the regular season, but come playoff time, they just completely destroyed everybody. If this was almost any other franchise, 94 Steve Young would have gotten the nod here. Seattle Seahawks, 2019 Russell Wilson. I could have gone with 2013 Russell Wilson as he had great efficiency numbers and he won the Super Bowl, but we all know that Super Bowl was won off of the back of Seattle's defense and Marshawn Lynch. In 2019, Wilson was spectacular, at least for half the season, but he still finished with over 4,000 yards passing, 31 touchdowns to just 5 interceptions, a 106 passer rating, while also running for 3 more scores. And then in the postseason, he continued his efficient play, but unfortunately, the Seahawks season ended in the divisional round versus Green Bay, but not before Wilson in those 2 playoff games had a 107 passer rating and averaged almost 10 yards per attempt and over 50 rushing yards a game. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 2020 Tom Brady. If I wanted to be a Tom Brady hater, which I'm not, I've never once hated on Tom Brady before in my life. I swear, okay? I would say that this season doesn't count because it was a pandemic season and there were no crowds, so basically it's a Mickey Mouse ring. But I'm not a hater, okay? Stop saying I'm a hater. Brady threw for over 4,600 yards, 40 touchdowns, a 102.2 passer rating, and 3 more scores in his first season in Tampa, which saw the Bucs finish 11-5, before going on to win 4 straight playoff games and the 2nd Super Bowl in franchise history. Although Brady's postseason had good stats, he was again up and down as he usually is and benefited from a bunch of short field that nobody ever talks about because Tom Brady has to get credit for everything because he's Tom Brady. He also single-handedly held Patrick Mahomes to just 9 points in the Super Bowl, so good for him. Tennessee Titans, 2003 Steve McNair. 2003 Steve McNair won co-MVP along with Peyton Manning, although to be honest, Peyton probably should have won it outright. Nevertheless, McNair still had 24 touchdown passes to just 7 interceptions while leading the league in passer rating with over 100. He also ran for 4 more scores and had his team 1 drive away from the conference championship game for the 2nd straight season, but unfortunately, his greatness was no match for Tom Brady's defense, as the Titans fell 17-14 thanks in part to a horrible Drew Bennett drop late in the game that never gets talked about ever, but needs to be talked about a lot more. And finally, the Washington Skins team, whatever. 1991 Mark Rypien. I talked about this before, but Mark Rypien in 1991 had a very underrated and overlooked great season, probably because he never duplicated it again and fell off soon pretty quickly after 91, but 3,500 yards, over 8 yards per attempt, being sacked just 7 times in 19 games, while also winning the Super Bowl and winning Super Bowl MVP. That's a hell of a year, and it's the best combination of individual stats and championship that any Washington quarterback has ever seen, which gives it the nod for me.